I'm here with Trey Little here at Public Square today, hanging out, talking about everything, man, from growing up in Detroit to leading protests to TikTok. So I've heard you say, I just want to start at the beginning, kind of. I've heard you say on multiple occasions, like, you shouldn't have made it out.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start there. Like, what was it like growing up in Detroit? Because you made it out, and you are excelling. You made it out, and you're excelling, but you're still here too. You made it out, but you're still here.
Yeah.
So man, tell me a little bit about like what that's like for you, and kind of that journey a little bit.
Yeah. So for me, when I was born into Detroit, I was born into an era that is referred to the war on drugs. So it's a whole, history on that where drugs and guns were imported into inner city communities, and it was to fund a war. But basically on my end, I didn't know all of that. I just knew that from the moment I was able to understand what was going on around me. If I go to a corner store, it'd be a guy, gun on his hip, asking what neighborhood I was from, where I'm coming from, and I would go into some of my friends' houses, and it would be like, war guns and large amounts of money and drugs, and it was like that was my reality. So when I was growing up into that, it was like everything that I knew. You know what I mean? It wasn't no fantasy world. It wasn't no entrepreneurs. Nothing else. It was just like, man, this is a war. You know what I mean? So it was, as a kid. Before that though, I had a nice childhood, but once I got old enough to understand the life I was born into, it was like, man, this is big. This is deep.
Yeah. So at what point did you kind of fall into this space where you're like, oh, this is a war zone. Like, this is my reality. Because I think, so you're like kind of shielded from it when you're younger, it sounds like, and then you just like wake up one day and you're like, this is crazy, right?
Yeah. So I was like, I think I was like 8 years old, and I remember this story. I'm playing Xbox with my friend, and we normally would spend the night over somebody's house, play video games, Xbox and stuff like that. And my friend had this brother who was way older than us, and a few days later, my aunt had told me like, he actually got killed, like somebody took his life, and they say that he told on somebody, so they made an example out of him, and they found him in like an alley or something like that. And I remember being 8 years old trying to process like, man, what the heck? Like, I was just playing. He helped me beat this level. Like, this level was hard. We playing games, and he grabbed the controller. He had his blunt. He was like, let me see the controller and beat the level. And I'm like, oh my God, thank you. You know what I mean? Like, 8 years old, I was already kind of like, aware of a lot of stuff. But I'm like, my dog, thanks for helping me beat that level. And then, to hear how that happened, it was like instantly my innocence was like, dang, man, like, this is my friend. And that's when it started hitting me. Then I found out that I lost my dad when I was 4. And it slowly came out, the story of what happened to him. And I was like, wow, man, I'm losing these people, and this is real. So when I was 13, already having these situations that happened, 13 years old, it was like, okay, I'm approaching the time that the age that my mama was when she gave birth to me. She was 15. So I'm like, okay, she kind of didn't really know how to, how to transition me. At that point, it was like, hey, this is the age where I started getting to where I started having these freedoms. So she kind of gave me a little more freedom to try to figure out, who I was and stuff. And I didn't have my dad and all that. So 13, that's when I was hanging out with the local guys in the neighborhood. And a lot of these guys was making a lot of money. They had street credit. So during my previous years of going to school, people would try to target me because I was a new guy in my neighborhood. So these guys promised me that protection. They promised me how to make money, how to be tough, so I wouldn't get picked on and stuff like that in school. So that's when they were like, you got to learn how to make money. You got to learn how to protect yourself. So that's when I bought my first gun at 13. And, I met up with a guy. Somebody told me where to go, bought it. Crazy story about that is that the fire pin was broke on it. So I never got to do anything with it. It was almost just like something to have, just to, like, if somebody ran up on me. Because at 13, it was almost like adults didn't see me as a teenager. They see me as like, oh, you old enough to shoot a gun. It's like when when you look at like child soldiers in foreign countries, it was like that for me growing up in Detroit. It was like people seen I was old enough to rob and shoot a gun because that's what people my age were doing, 13 years old, you know. So that's when it changed from childhood to like, oh yeah, it's game time. Like it's time to be a man. It's time to make money. It's time to protect myself. You know, which is crazy because I look at 13-year-olds today. I'm like, wow, man, these are babies. You know?
Yeah, you have to grow up really fast. Like that doesn't even like. It's like a world that's just so different. Like almost like a fictional world to somebody like me who doesn't like. You familiar with The Wire?
Yeah,
like,
of course. Yeah.
Like one of my favorite shows of all time. Like it sounds like The Wire to me. Like your story sounds like a real life depiction of The Wire, and it sounds like that was a pretty accurate depiction of what was happening in Baltimore at the time, or continues to happen. So were you caught up in that for a while? Like did you? I mean, you don't have to like go into like details, but were you caught up kind of in that lifestyle for a period of time?
Yeah, so it was until like the age 15, which was like it. To think about it, I was introduced to it almost all my life. You know, as a kid, I remember finding like it was like a rifle or something in the closet, and I remember like bringing like some of the ammunition to school. It was almost like I was already kind of in it as a kid, you know, like elementary. And then I remember, you know, finding guns, like playing with them around people's house and different people's house I was over. And, you know, spending the night over cousin's house, seeing ambulance and police cars, seeing that, like, dang, somebody just got killed right there. Like, so it was almost like I was a part of that all my life. But then when I hit 13 to 15, it's like when I started really just living it out. You know what I mean? I'm talking like taking people's cars, and it was like all that trauma that I experienced. Those 2 years felt like forever looking back, you know, but those 2 years, everything that I went through, it was almost like, man, we about to take these cars. People started introducing me, so we would drive around in stolen cars and run from the police just for fun, and you know, never got caught. But you know, and carrying guns and trap houses, you know, being mentored by like kingpins, like that 2 years was such a short time, but so much happened in that time where it was like it felt like it was longer than that. But I think it was partially because when I was a kid, all these things were around me the whole time, you know. So yeah, it was like 2 years, but it felt like forever, you know.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, I mean, I don't know, man. Almost like you don't have a choice. Like, did it feel like you didn't have a choice? Like it was like I'm gonna end up on one side of this war.
Yeah.
So I better choose a side and like have those be my people or the people that I run with. Like, is that accurate?
Yeah. Because I mean, the thing is, like, I like to tell people who don't understand this world at all. Like, nowadays, you know, it seems like we have more choices. You know, you got YouTube, TikTok, you got the internet. But at the same time, that's still kind of foreign to some people. But to me at that time, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have, like, phones for real, like, you know, cell phones. So it was almost like, who's going to protect me? You know what I mean? It was like no... In downtown Detroit where I lived at, it was like a ghost town. You know what I mean? So there was no real outside area. And even at that time, like, I couldn't drive. I couldn't go anywhere else. So it was like, in my radius of my neighborhood, if I walk across, you know, I lived on this street called Dexter. If I cross this busy street and go over and go too far and then go to an area called Zone 8, then I was in trouble. You know what I mean? Or if I cross this busy street and go to this neighborhood, you know, people didn't recognize my face. You know, I was surrounded by guys ready to, you know, run up on me and do whatever they was going to do. So it was like, if I didn't pick a side or pick a gang to join, then it was almost like I was in trouble. And I knew that, like, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to play video games. I wanted to be a rapper. I wanted to just have fun and be a kid. But it was like, man, these people, they coming at me and I'm getting caught up in stuff that's going on around me on my way to school, right? I had some guys look at me like, oh, you look little, you look weak. So they followed me to school. So then, you know, one of the guys ran up on me and tried to swing on me just because I was a new guy and they wanted to pick on me. So fought the guy and earned my respect. And then people was like, okay. And then, you know, I moved to another school. It was like Eminem's story. His mom was poor, so she moved him to all these different schools. Mm-hmm. I go to another school. I couldn't get an education because I go to the bathroom. I remember it was Friday. They did this thing called Freshman Friday. They pushed the trash can in the floor, in the middle of the floor, and they said, we about to put New Boy in the trash can. So I knew at that time, like, man, I do not want to go through this right now. In my head, I'm like, I don't want to do this. Like, I really don't. And I was scared in the inside, but I'm like, I can't let these guys see that. It's like a shark in the water. If you show your fear, then they're going to get you. So I'm like, all right, put my hands up, backed up in the corner. It was like, first one of y'all run up, y'all get laid out. And they couldn't see my fear, but they was like, my mans, yeah, you with us now, man. You with our crew now. And I'm like, thank God. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's what it was for me,
Yeah. But now you're with their crew, right? And everything, everything that entails, right?
And now they're like, don't touch him, man. He about that life, man. If you put your hands on Trey, he'll mess you up. Like, and I got my credit just by proving myself. Because in school, it was like the Freedom Riders. If you ever seen that movie, it was, it was crazy. So it's like, I seen what happened to guys if they came in, or even if they had like a disability and they couldn't protect themselves. Man, I don't watch guys get stomped out just because they were like nerds. And I'm like, I can't let that happen to me, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, man, it was like no choice for real. And I think what happens was people was only repeating what they seen, happen to them, or what their parents did and their parents did. And so it was this thing that this cycle that just kept repeating. What I mean? So yeah.
Yeah. What how did you find yourself working your way out of that?
Yeah, so I think it hit a point to where I seen and went through so much stuff, and I realized that your friends and the people around you, your environment, is what really influences you. So throughout that process, I lost a lot to that life, and I was like, man, I never want to go through this. Like, I never wanted to be in that life, and it just felt like punishment, really. You know what I mean? By the time I was like 15, it felt like a trial or a sentence. Like, why am I going through this? But then it was like I had to be tough and accept it. Like, everybody where I'm from go through this. What's another way? What's another option? You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know about, the American dream. I didn't even know what that meant. The American dream for me was to have an army of guys and money and to protect myself and women. It was like these different thoughts. That's what the American dream was for me. Be a big drug dealer, all that kind of stuff, have a nice car. But it hit a point where I'm 15 and I'm like, man, I lost so much friends that I'll never see again because they got caught up in this life. But somehow, all the stuff I did, I never, did any jail time, never had to go before a judge. I'm still alive. But I know most of my guys and my bros that I grew up with, they're not here no more. So, there was a lot of historical things like redlining that didn't allow Black people to move to certain areas. So once different areas started opening up, my mom, we were on Section 8, so we were able to move finally into the suburbs. Because before that, like, we were in poverty, we couldn't afford to move to the suburbs. So once our situation allowed us to move to the suburbs, I was able to see a new life, right? But what happened was I didn't fit in. So I found the same guys that came from where I came from that moved to the suburbs that I can meet up with, right? Mm-hmm. So I started finding all the tough guys. And I became like a leader to some of those guys. I'm like, all right, let me start a crew out here. So I found myself getting kicked out of school in the suburbs, and it was like, man, if somebody wanted to fight me, like, I snapped like a switch. And then, I'm getting in a lot of trouble, and I'm like, man, I done moved to this new place, and I'm getting in trouble again. I done made it out this war, and I'm in the suburbs still getting in trouble. My grandma moves me to Milwaukee because she lived out there at the time. I get kicked out of school out there. So I'm like, I'm getting all these different chances, and there's more opportunities opening up, but I can't shake this mentality that I grew up in. I can't shake this trauma. There's something wrong with me. There's something inside of me that's not allowing me to accept the new life that I was in, right? And there was valid reasons that I didn't fit in. I mean, there was a lot of discrimination, people saying different things were making me feel like an outsider in the suburbs. But I'm like, how can I find peace in this new world where, yeah, people might be insulting me because of the color of my skin, but at least I ain't got to worry about getting shot waking up. You know what I mean? So it's like, how can I find peace inside where I have a new fight, but at least I'm physically safe. You know what I mean? So I'm like, okay. And that's when I was like, man, I just want to start over. And I started thinking like, man, if I could get a new name, be born, like reincarnated or something. Because at that time, I had people in Detroit that was like threatening me when they see me come back to the city, that was going to take my life and all this crazy stuff, right? So I'm like, I just needed a fresh start. But I hit a point where I started reading these comic books. It was talking about forgiveness and God and purpose. And I started meeting these people that taught me about, Black history and why I should be proud of my culture and heritage. I'm like, I never heard of this stuff. I just thought we was meant to be goons and thugs, you know what I mean? I'm like, I didn't know there was pride in our culture.
That's interesting.
So,
Sorry to cut you off, but like that even like your mindset would be that, like, because I think that there is a lot of that certainly in the white community of like whatever propaganda or whatever you see on the news. We were kind of talking about that off camera. That you would fall into that, but that would be your life as a Black man, and that would even be your mentality like that.
I thought, I'm like, man, I'm meant to be this. I'm meant to be tough. I'm meant, I'm meant to be hard, a gangster, rep a neighborhood or a gang. And he was like, no, man, like, look at the monuments your people built in Africa. I'm like, really, we did this? Like, man, look, man, like, and he was teaching me all this empowerment stuff. And then at the same time, I like randomly found this literature at this back to school event I went to. It was at a church, and it was talking about God's love and forgiveness. So I took the empowerment as a Black man in my culture with this comic book that I found at this school. It was like this colorful little comic book about God's love and forgiveness. So I'm like, man, I've hurting people. My mom is upset with me. My stepdad is upset with me because, they wanted to give me a new chance to start over and bring me out here, but I'm screwing it up. Like, I started reading about this love and forgiveness, and I didn't really feel that much love. Love from my mom was like, I'm keeping you alive, boy. Like, I'm tough on you because I want you to stay alive. But I think when I heard these words of, like, it's okay that you made mistakes. Like, I love you. There was these, like, comic books, and I was like, yo, like, is this what God is? I thought I was going, I'm like, man, I'm like, all the stuff I did, man, there ain't no way that there's some love out there for me. But when I read that and started realizing that my purpose was bigger, I took the music that I was always interested in and applied that and started telling my story, and that's when it changed.
Did you have like a religious background before that? Like, did you grow up in church, or was that for you like the first experience that you had with a God like that would be loving and forgiving?
Yeah. So for me, it was like, we got drugged to church and all that, and it was like, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. If you don't do this, then you're gonna burn. And I'm like, well, I was definitely gonna burn then, because I'm out. You know what I mean?
It didn't feel hopeful.
No, you see guys with suits and ties on, and then I'm like, this don't relate to me, man. Like, these guys don't understand my world. Like, it's cool because you got a nice car, Bentley, you got money, a nice house, but that don't apply to me in my world. So when I went, we would just talk to girls and get numbers, and we was like talking to the church girls and stuff like that. So it was like, that's why I like going to church. It was like, it was some girls there, So, but besides that, it was like, it didn't apply to me. It didn't apply to God loves you. It was about, the church felt like it was taking something from me, you know what I mean? And saying that I was a problem as a person if I don't turn. But when I read this God loves you, I was like, whoa, like, you have a purpose. It was way different than that message that I heard growing up. And I knew that this wasn't about, me telling somebody else about their life. This was just about me discovering myself and my purpose, you know what I mean? And feeling that love and forgiveness,
Yeah. So you said you started to tell your story through music. What was that like? So you're what, 15? Is that like when you're 15?
Like 16, that
Okay.
whole year. Because I was kicked out of school for like a whole year for some stuff that I did. So that whole year I was just studying, reading, studying.
And then how did you start your music career? How did you start making music or telling that story? Like, what was the outlet for that?
Yeah, so I stopped rapping because I thought rapping was, at that time, like, I started going to this like super conservative church because this little comic book that I read, it was enough to get my attention, but it was like, yeah, you should find a community of people that think like you, believers, right? So I started going to this church that was saying like rap is bad, name brand Nikes is bad, and I'm like, well, I was just like, man, I'm young, I'm impressionable, so I stopped rapping because they're like, yeah, music is bad, all this stuff is bad, right? So I'm like, okay,
What a terrible religion, man, where everything is
man,
bad.
for real, bro. Like, it was crazy. So I stopped doing music, and then my granddad came along and said, it's okay for you to do music. 'Cause my granddad is like, a real spiritual person. He's like, just tell your story about how you grew up. He was like, did you want a Bible? There was murderers, people cut off ears. And I'm like, for real? They got people like that? Okay, like that, So I'm like, let me tell my story. But what happened in that time, like people would try to filter it and tell me that it had to be this positive, fluffy story. And I was like, well, my story ain't really fluffy. So I kind of kept it to myself because I thought my music was bad. You know what I mean? And yeah, but eventually it got to a point where I expressed it privately and writing it and recording it, and then it became enough for me, like therapy, to tell my story and even put it on a page.
Yeah. I love that because all of our stories are pretty messy, and I think that that's the hard thing is when people want you to make them feel better with your story, and you're like, my story is actually really good, right? Like, it was bad and it was messy, but look how far I've come. Like, let me tell that part of the story. Like that's why what I appreciate about our conversation today is like seeing how far you've come, like following you on TikTok and on YouTube, and like having some like knowledge of your story from before. Like you don't get the good piece without the messy piece. So I think being able to tell that story and finding that outlet is so important. What so you kind of blew up in the music world a little bit, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
What was that like?
It was a process. It was like when I first started off, it was like a journey. I had joined this band at the time. The band, they found out that I can rap, so they Alright. But yeah, I joined this band. They found out that I can rap, and they wanted me to come in and rap about my life and my story. But they kind of like made me like this polished version of like hyping up what they did and just kind of being like the guy who gave them the diversity or whatever. But it gave me an outlet to be able to travel. We got on radio. I was able to play festivals, and it hit a dead end when I realized that, like, man, this is changing me and who I feel like I'm meant to be and the story that I'm meant to tell. So, I appreciate it for what it was, but then since we were traveling all around the country, magazines, radio interviews and stuff like that, I met a lot of big names that kind of loved who I was backstage when I was telling them, like, it's more to me than just coming out, putting my hands up, hyping up a crowd of people that don't look nothing like me, like, and trying to fit in and wearing clothes that don't really reflect me. And then other people were like, well, how about you come travel with me? And these were like well-known names who had, either Grammys or signed to big labels and gold records and stuff like that. So, we started meeting. They took me on the road. I was able to play arenas, 30,000 people, all around the country, 10,000 people arenas. So I started networking and connecting. And then I hit a point to where, when I was solo as an artist, I was able to discover, like, who am I? What kind of person am I? And I was so young that I wasn't as mature in my music because I was still trying to figure out my message. So as I got older and moved back to Detroit from the suburbs, I'm like, man, there's a whole culture of music out here. So it's grimy, it's gritty, and it speaks to the culture. So I'm like, that's what hip hop is. Rap is meant to speak to the culture and be relevant. Not something that's just positive and encouraging. It's meant to really be raw and honest. So I started just easing up to tell my story piece by piece because I had built this following of people who just wanted the positive, get your hands up and jump around kind of music. But I'm like, I started easing telling my story, and I noticed when I talked about my dad losing his life and my mom having me as a teenager and growing up in the street war, some of those songs became the most powerful songs. So fast forward, getting on social media, taking advantage of that. When things shut down during the pandemic, building 1 million followers, it just projected the amount of people that was listening to my stuff. And I felt like I matured enough in my music to where it was time for the world to start listening and embrace what I was doing,
Yeah. What, so you built your TikTok following.
Yeah.
What, how many followers you got?
1.2 million. 1.2 million followers.
How'd that happen?
Just consistent, man. When it first came out, like there's this entrepreneur named Gary Vee, one of the top social media entrepreneurs, said that TikTok was going to be the next wave for artists. And I was posting like 10 videos a day, and I was getting 100,000 followers per month. But at first, I was getting no views. But once I got my first video to crack like 1,000 views, I was like, oh, okay. You know, I went from 0 views to like 1,000, and I was like, okay, like my 100th video or something like that. And I just kept doing it and kept repeating what worked and telling my story. And over time, like everybody was at home during the lockdown and the pandemic. And then once I started telling that story, like man, it just multiplied, you know. And I kept doing what I seen work, posting 10 videos a day, showing people my real daily life and saying, hey, here's my story. Like I live, you know, back in Detroit now. Here's what I'm doing in the community. People gravitated towards that content, and I was getting millions of views. Like, you know, about time I really built my following up, the views were coming in, and I just started talking about my music, my life, and people just started supporting me.
Yeah, this is all organic.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, all organic. Yeah, no shout outs, no endorsements, none of that. It was just like purely just working hard, you know.
Yeah. What? So the other thing that I want to talk about was like your influence, kind of when the George Floyd incident, for lack of a better term, happened. Cities are burning. There are protests in the street, rightfully so, right? Like, but I think I remember it was like a Facebook status where you went live and you were like, "I'm going down. I'm going to where the protests are. We're not gonna burn down Detroit. Like, this is my city. This is where I live." What happened? Like, what's going on in your mind in that moment where you're like, I just gotta go protect my city, or at least be one of the voices that's involved here.
So it started off because we did the protest. It was a nonviolent protest. We got the word out. Like over 1,000 people showed up. News showed up, and I felt like we had the attention that we needed. But it just took a turn where other groups came out and they felt like this ain't enough. Like we need to shake some fear into these people. So I'm like, okay, but I'm sitting back after I do the protest, and it was amazing. Like the community, everything came out. It was amazing, right? But then you have other groups like, man, this ain't enough. Like forget this, peace and community and unity. Like we ready to, get it lit or whatever, right? Whatever they have going on. So it hit a point to where, I seen some people antagonize the police in Detroit. And in Detroit, a lot of the officers are black, right? So I seen some people antagonize the police, and then I seen people downtown that was from the community of Detroit in the face of the police because somebody had antagonized them, and the police standing there with riot gear. So you had people who wasn't even at the protest come down and was like, man, why they in riot gear? What's up? And people were having a good weekend, but to see police surrounding the riot gear because you had people throwing stuff at them and getting them riled up and shooting fireworks at them. Some people that didn't even want to get caught up or in that, they came through and they got caught up in that situation. So it just became this high tense moment. So I decided, like, man, it's getting out of hand. Where's the leadership? Who's leading this? It was like a bunch of people that stayed downtown Detroit from Ann Arbor, Rochester, Troy, Ferndale. They all came down there and they stayed down there after the protest just to kind of see what they could do, right? And I seen some people getting out their cars like, where's the protest? I'm bored. I'm tired of this lockdown, this pandemic, right? So I'm seeing like, yo, y'all got innocent black people that don't even mean to come down here and be fighting with the police. Y'all are getting them caught up in this whole tear gassing thing that's going on, right? That was a separate thing, but you got innocent people come down. So I seen like, yo, there has to be some leadership, right? It's just like a lot of miscommunication. So I decided to go down and I started asking people what happened. They're like, well, you got these people coming down here shooting fireworks at the police, antagonizing them, and they have to protect themselves, so they put on this riot gear. But then, you got people coming from the hood thinking that they just down here trying to shoot people up for no reason. So it was just this mess, right? So I'm documenting, getting videos and stuff, talking to people, and then, decided to go back home. And then that next day, I seen the same thing. I seen this like, these kids, man, like shooting fireworks in black women and black men's face who look like my aunties and uncles. And some of these guys, you can tell they grew up in the hood. Like I asked one of the officers in the video that I did that went viral, like, where you from? He said he's from the King Home Projects. I was like, any of y'all know where the King Homes is? Like, that's the projects. Like, you know, and I seen this disconnect. So I was like, man, something's got to give. Something's got to happen. We need more direction than this. Like, and I didn't really see anybody from the community that was like a leader in any of these neighborhoods out there saying we should be doing it. So I was like, man, it was a tough situation, but I felt like I should step up and kind of direct people. Like, and then in my video, I said, if y'all wanna tear some stuff up, go back to where y'all live at. Like, when y'all break down y'all own, you know, stores in y'all neighborhood, like y'all ain't from here, so why y'all trying to burn stuff down? Because what happened was black people from Detroit were getting the blame. And I'm like, we're not the ones doing this.
Yeah.
I'm seeing people with ski masks, you know, bats with barbed wire and all this weird stuff, and they're the ones tagging everything and spray painting. You know, we go through Southwest Detroit, and it wasn't the people that was natively from the neighborhood. It was people coming in, spray painting everything up, these businesses. I'm like, people from this neighborhood own these businesses. So that's what made me step up and say, man, like, we just need some more direction. And I just felt like there was a lack of leadership there in that moment. You know?
Yeah. What's that like? Because I feel like you were like the man of peace, which is a really difficult thing to be, probably.
Yeah.
When you think about what that means, especially during like the height of that, where we were having these conversations about police brutality and another African American man dead, and to be able to like try to exist in both of those worlds at that time. Like, what's that even? Did you feel? Would you even think about that?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, what happened? Like, especially if you think about where I come from in my story, like, you know, my people that I grew up with, they know that like I've done a lot of stuff that's far from peace. You know what I mean? To defend myself, to protect myself, the people that I love. So what happens now is like I'm choosing to be peaceful because I know we need some cordial conversations, and I know people are angry, rightfully so. I was angry, but I'm like, why do this and tear up, you know, where I live at, where, you know, like Detroit was burned down in '67 and never fully recovered. I'm like, why are we taking this out here? If we want to tear some junk up, let's go to, you know, where George Floyd was killed at. Let's go out there, like, you know what I mean? Like, let's pull up, let's see what's going on, where this stuff really happened. And I'm like, yeah, we've had things in Detroit, like you've seen the Detroit movie, you know, some of these incidents, but you know what I mean? I'm like, the topic right now, what's going on is what happened in these other cities. You know what I mean? Like, let's not lose focus and just start trying to fight. What I seen was people were just trying to fight anybody. You know what I mean? It was like people were angry and just trying to go at whoever, right? And there was like so much chaos. And I'm like, man, we need to focus on policy change. We need to focus on the being in the meetings, being like where the power is to make change, right? Because I'm like, yeah, we can. And I'm like, we can go fight on some police and pull out some guns and get the shooting and all that, but we know that's going to end with the National Guard coming in and killing more innocent people, right? So I'm like, what's going to make the change? Us being in these meetings, us being, you know, where the policies get changed, where our people get protected, where we can, you know, hold police accountable. I'm all good for that, right? But when there's just, let's tear junk up, let's fight, let's argue, and we're the ones that are going to hurt at the end of the day, I'm not okay with it, you know?
Yeah. So you mentioned policy change. Have you seen some of that since you've been involved with the movement? I know I've seen you with Chief Craig.
Yeah.
I know, you know, I've seen you on the news. Like, you've certainly gained some notoriety. Have you seen some of those policy changes?
Yeah. So one of the ones specifically that I introduced to Chief Craig was the 8 Can't Wait, which meant he had the power to change that, because some of the laws people wanted him to change is like legalize all drugs, and like, you know, you would have to vote that in, and that's a longer process. Like, Chief Craig can't legalize all drugs in Detroit, right? So I mean, stuff like that. It was like when I came to meet with him, I was like, man, listen, there's issues in our community. You know, let's talk about this. What are different things that, you know, I can do to take over some of these responsibilities with my people, to where y'all don't have to go out if there's some stuff in schools, you know, where there's a school that's in poverty, so, you know, they're fighting and doing this. Like, what's something do I need to raise money to bring to these schools? Because, you know, like, how can I do this to basically provide solutions for my community? So that's what that meeting was about, you know. What are y'all already doing? And, oh, y'all are doing school programs to help kids get licensed, because, you know, that's a big issue in Detroit. You know, high insurance, the lack of being able to get licensed, so when kids drive, they get pulled over, get fined, go to jail. So I'm like, how can I fight that, you know what I mean, and help people out, right? So I introduced the A Can't Wait. It's like, you ban chokeholds. You require de-escalation, so you can't just get out and just shoot somebody or choke somebody out. Like, you have to try to de-escalate it. There's public accountability, where if an officer has a complaint against them, it's public, right? There's also no shooting at moving vehicles. So we were like going through all these different changes, and we were going back and forth. And it's like, well, if somebody's shooting at us, and like, how would we not be able to shoot back? I'm like, what if there's a kid in the car? Like, and we went through these specific policies, and there's 8 of them total, and it was like this. It was this back and forth thing. It wasn't like an argument. It was just more of us hashing it out. Like, is this practical?
Yeah.
Why aren't y'all doing this? And Detroit already adopted, like, I think 4 of them. So it was like a few weeks later when I seen an article that Detroit passed those 8. That A Can't Wait, and then other cities passed it as well. So yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So what are you still pretty involved in processes like that with the chief? It sounds like you have a pretty good relationship with him. And what's that like? What's it like having a good relationship with the chief of police here in the city and being able to like vocalize and help make change to policing?
Yeah. So one of the misconceptions is that people that say stuff like you paid by the police, like, or they're telling you what to do and whatever, right? But the thing is, I never for once asked them for permission, or oh, can I do this? Can I do this? Or what do you want me to do? Like, I'm not some coffee boy for nobody. You know what I mean? For nobody. It's more of like, listen, I feel like I represent, a big part of a community in Detroit, and I want to be the voice for them. Let me bring the concerns of the people to these meetings and figure out how I can be the mouthpiece for these communities, right? And I'm just one of many, but I'm like, if I have this influence, how can I bring up different concerns and different issues of what they have? So I went to different, neighborhoods in Detroit where my family at, different cousins, different neighborhoods where like a lot of people don't go because they're, scary neighborhoods or whatever, right? Whatever people think. But because of my relationships, people respect me. So I started asking them, like, man, what would y'all like to see different about policing, right? And these are things that I collected, and I would bring them up to these meetings and stuff like that. So right now we're focusing on trauma change, or trauma-enforced policing, where police have to get trauma training and stuff like that, or they go through it. Because when you go out and see, a life being lost, or when somebody threatens you with a gun, or when you have this trauma, it reflects on how you police the community. So we're trying to get police to be able to do different things and be active in the community where they build relationships, and we're trying to get it to where the police don't come out for every single thing, where it's like, now when it's like domestic abuse, or like, for instance, when somebody shot a bullet through my house, like accidentally or whatever, stuff like that, right? I mean, who else is going to handle that? But if it's somebody who's mentally ill walking around, let's get a social worker out there, right? I'm trying to step up and basically, provide solutions for these things. And if we need funding or whatever, we need programs or volunteers, like, that's what I'm trying to bring to the table. So it's more of us saying, here's my team, here's my influence. How can we come in and basically say, listen, like, here are some solutions for these issues. Like, can we adopt this? Can we put this in writing? Can we make this a policy? So yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And then tell me a little bit about just like what else you're up to. I know you're like giving away Easter baskets, and still making music, still doing TikTok. So like, where can we find you? How can we check out what you're doing and keep up with it?
So right now I'm doing content, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, like creating content, mentoring teenagers, helping to invest in like young Black businesses, promoting Black businesses, really just trying to like teach the next generation how to become sustainable and create their own job. So I mean, I do a lot of investing now, stock market, crypto. Want to get into business, want to get into real estate. We got a 3,000 square feet house in Detroit, and it already went up in value. So I'm trying to recreate that and also teach other young kids in different cities and neighborhoods where I come from how easy it is to build credit. And also, like, I know a lot of people who, get felonies and it gets hard and they need jobs and all this stuff. So I'm really trying my best to break those systemic issues by providing finances and resources, because that's really all it is. Like, some people really won't do what they feel like they have to do if they have the resources, the knowledge, and the information that they can do. I noticed there's a lot of young kids around here who want wealth and want to be rich. They just don't know how. If they want wealth and riches, and to start a business, and you see the local drug dealer on the corner driving, the new 2021 Escalator Yukon, and you think that's the quickest and only way, right? Same how it was for me growing up. But if they see me pulling up, like, dang, this guy TikToker, he live in my neighborhood, he doing this, man, and he showing me how to do it, right? So I did a free class when I gave out the Easter baskets on how to become an entrepreneur on the internet, how to build a brand, stuff like that. So I'm really just trying to recreate everything that I learned and make it easier, and be an example that people need to see and should be seeing. I'm trying to create more of that so we can make change. I'm not necessarily waiting on politicians to change it, but I'm stepping in and saying, like, what can I do with the influence that I have? It ain't about me just sitting back, being famous and getting bread and money and just relaxing. Yeah. It's about me using my influence to empower, to impact and help grow, communities and make difference.
Yeah, that's so cool. Is there anything else we should talk about?
Like,
you miss anything?
There's a lot. When it comes to finances too, man, like I said, like, the one thing that changed my life is that somebody stepping in and being a resource, because what I realized is people most of the time do stuff because they feel like that's their only option. So it's like, being a resource to people, and what I try to do is bring other business people in, right? So I'm friends with the former president of Shinola, right? Things that I'll do is try to introduce him to some of my people that grow up in it. And it's like, here, you want to meet a business owner, right? He can just talk to him, hang out with him, right? The marketing agent of Nike's going to be there. You can meet him as well, right? So I try to do these different things and go to schools and see different needs and try to bring people in who can speak directly to that. So, like I said, one of the things I encourage all people to do is, like, it all starts with a conversation. You never know how you can rub off on someone and help them. It really just starts with a conversation and just building a relationship, because that's what changed my life. Different business owners showing me how easy it was. I had a friend who, in college showed me that he got $13,000 in his stock portfolio. And he showed me, like, here's how I did it with Robinhood with $5. And he showed me how to do that. And I'm like, dang, that's all it takes. I thought you had to be some guy who come from a wealthy family and get $10,000 to put in.
Yeah, they have like all this extra before you can even jump in.
He showed me with $5 how to do it, and after he showed me how to do it with $5, fast forward, like, I have the means to have exactly how much he showed me in his portfolio. He had $13,000. Like, now I'm like, oh, I'm there now. You know what I mean? Like, which is crazy. Like, and it was like less than a year. You know what I mean? So that's all it really was, So, and I encourage people, if they see an issue, be a part of the solution if you really want to help.
Find a way to give back. I think that's so important. What you're saying about mindset, we were talking a little bit off camera about, for me, the people who have come into my life who have been encouraging and shown me a different way, right? In my own business life, as far as entrepreneurship, opening a coffee shop and working in my finance business, like, it took people who had a mindset of, you can do this, let me help you, let me be a resource for you. So I think it's so cool that you recognize, like, how far you've come, like, from the war zone to now, like, I'm going to give back, I'm going to find a way to pass the lessons along, so hopefully some of those guys don't have to learn the hard way, the way that you did.
Yeah, and I want to give people, like, power and leverage. It's like, if I give as many people, and the reality is not everybody's going to take it. Some people just feel like there's no hope and you can't force anybody to do anything. But what I want to do is give my community more power and leverage to impact their own lives and then go back and impact their own communities as well. So if we get more people that rise up and create businesses, what they're created to do and they're passionate about, that's the solution that I see. And then, let's build up our community strong enough to where we have people policing our own communities. Like, where if I see a young guy breaking in the house next door, I'm gonna be like, man, like, what you doing, bro? Like, you need some money? Yeah. Like, what's up, bro? Like, you can't be kicking at her door, bro. Like, she, old lady working hard. Like, what you need a job? Like, I'll go help you get hired at the corner, coffee shop. Like that kind of stuff, man. Like I'm trying to. That's the goal and that's the vision. Which we're already doing, and we're just gonna keep doing it.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Well, thank you. I really appreciate this. This was fun. We'll have to do it again. But
yeah, for sure.
We could probably talk for like 3 more hours because we already did it off camera.
Yeah, we got 3 hours off camera. Yeah.
That's right, man. Well, thank you, Johnny. Thanks for making an appearance, man. It was really nice of you to come on the podcast. Appreciate that.
But yeah, if y'all want to follow what I'm doing, you can follow me at Trey Little, TrayLittle, Trey Little, anywhere online.
Anywhere online. All right, man. Cool. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Man.